what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed. The light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome everyone to Whole Soul Mastery and Whole Soul School and Foundations Joint podcast series today. I'm back again with Dr. Paul Panzica. We are at the end of February 2024. We're about to turn the corner, into March. We know that this whole year probably promises some big changes and shifts and all kinds of energies. And we're here today to just talk about the things that we're seeing, the things that we're experiencing. Welcome, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, you've recently written an article. You continue to write and blog about the deep things that you see and feel and track through time and stories and myths and everything. The title of your latest blog is Rumors, Lies, and Anti-Culture in the Time of the Second Coming. I know there's a lot of things we could talk about, but for me, I might seed the conversation because what really struck me is something that I've been feeling, and it's come up with other podcasts that I've been doing, is you spotlight the Legoic light of truth in your article. There's a lot of, you expose the darkness as well, calling it out, and, it doesn't really hide from you, Paul, or me, but especially you take some deep dives into some of this stuff. As the darkness is getting exposed and being pushed to the surface, there is a choice, this Legoic light of truth, and you equate that to the Christ impulse. And if I extend beyond that, you were saying that the only way to navigate through the kind of the chaos of our times, the challenges of our times, is through heart-centered feeling. And I think that's a really good place to start because the mind is what gets us into all the traps of the distortions and the manipulations and everything else. But the heart has a way of being able to discern the truth beyond something else that's masquerading as truth. And in these times, I think we're all called to learn to discern more of this. But the beauty about the heart is it gets it. It doesn't have to think, it knows. So anyway, I thought I'd start off with that topic of the Legoic light of truth and heart-centered feelings, getting into the feeling of things. And that's where truth lives. It's in there. It's in the heart. It's in the knowing. So I'll toss it to you, Paul. Would you share some thoughts on that?
Well, again, thank you for having me. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things coming to the surface. Okay, so there, I would say that from an astrological perspective, there was a crossing of Pluto into Aquarian time, or the Aquarian sector. We're now Pluto is now in Aquarius. And that represents a leveling energy, specifically related to the spiritual aspects of existence. So there's a lot of words floating around that describe this best, but the sense that I get, and I couldn't figure this out. I actually had an astrologer friend of mine point this out after it started. Going into the beginning of the year was an extremely dark time for me. I mean, I was looking at just these oppressive feelings. Part of it might have been seasonal, I don't know, but eventually I conveyed this in words, saying that it felt like the portals, the gates of hell opened up, and I'm looking in them, right? We're looking into this really dark potential. And the feeling that I had at that time is that there's no way around this. You have to go through it. We have to walk through this. And and so how do we get through this, you know? And and it wasn't until after I expressed those ideas that, you know, a friend of mine basically said, yeah, you know, this is the point where Pluto has crossed into Aquarius, and that there was all kinds of really interesting alignments this month, but it was basically causing a lot of disruptions spiritually. And it's not just inside, it's outside also. There's all kinds of terrible things that are going on in the world as it's starting to expose itself. I think in that essay I talked about the idea that Plato stated, which was that living in this reality is like looking at shadows that are cast upon a wall, and that we're living and we're chained to a wall, and we can only face forward looking at images that are being casted upon the wall, right? And within that narrow confinement, it's the only thing that we can see are the shadows. And so we believe that to be reality, but it's really an illusion of reality. It's an illusionary reality, right?
Right.
And so anytime somebody talks about slavery to a person who doesn't recognize themselves as being a slave, you know, so we were born into this world with the illusion of freedom. We all think we're free, but over time, we start to realize that that's not really the case. That we have an illusionary government, an illusionary religions, illusionary educational system. None of those things are for real. They're not real. The question is, and I don't know if anyone actually asked the question, but when Plato, professed this, he said, "This is the reality." And how did he know this question? Answer is that he was an initiate of the mysteries of specific mystery school. And so you can say that they had experiences outside of the linear time continuum, and that was the impression that you get is that, oh, I see, this is what it's like. It's like we're in prison and we're being shown these images, but they're not the real images, right? And so he felt that, you know, it was up to the person who goes through these mysteries to come back and try to teach people about it. But there's an issue with that. First issue is that when you tell people who believe that they're free, that they're slaves, they're likely to kill you.
I was going to say, shoot the messenger for sure.
Yes, either they will completely and utterly ignore you, or, you know, that in Jesus's experience, he tried to tell people that, you know, you're slaves, and they wanted to stone them to death, right? And so people don't take to that kindly. And then the second thing is that if you're going to do this through like some form of institution, like a school, or if you're going to do this through religion, or an organization where I'm the leader, you know, I'm the wise, knowledgeable professor, or, you know, the philosopher or the guru or whatever, it doesn't work that way either. You know, it doesn't work that way either, because the problem is that you're working within the distortion of the shadow itself. You're working within the distortions of the shadow itself. And so the real question would be, who's casting those shadows? How are those shadows being casted?
Right.
Right. So
who's
I think
projecting?
it's a complicated answer. Right? Because the idea is that it has to be cast by light. That's for sure. It has to be cast by light. It has to be cast by light. So the idea is that there's a light behind us casting the shadows. Or if you can move away from his analogy a little bit and say, we're standing in a cave and we can't turn around, but there's a light behind us and it's casting shadows onto the wall, and our shadow is part of that shadow reality. Okay. So we can look at that and say, okay, well, that's pretty simple. All we have to do is turn around and look at the light. But in shadows, in Plato's reality, you couldn't do that because there was a wall behind you that you're not allowed to look behind it.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's another consideration to make, and that is that there's another realm that's usurped itself into the whole scenario. And that is a shadowy realm, which we call the astral realm. So that astral realm is influencing us, and it's influencing our behavior, and it's causing us to cast shadows against the wall that are not necessarily in our best interest. Okay, so that's a frightening thought to actually think about. If you actually say, well, yeah, there's this astral realm, and there's these dispirited or disincarnated entities that like to interact with us and cause us to behave badly, and portray themselves as God and authority figures and all other kinds. I mean, the ancient people knew about them. They called them archons. They were the rulers of the shadowy realm.
Wow.
Right. And so that people don't want to hear that either. You tell them that, yeah, there really is things like possession and entity attachments and manipulation from all different perspectives of existence that are trying to, connect to this, darker, enslaving force that seems to have parasitized human beings for a long period of time. No one wants to hear that, but it's being exposed now. It's coming to the surface. It's coming to the surface. So the question about, I wrote about this a while back. It was actually in Beyond the Soul's Meridian. It just fell on deaf ears, or just people aren't ready to hear it, or there's just no interest in it. But there's an idea that we could develop another aspect of our soul. We could develop another aspect of our soul. And now if you want to study the science of the soul, it exists. You can look at theosophical writings. You can look at Eastern esoteric writings. You can look at Gnostic writings, and it'll talk about the different aspects of our soul. It even exists in Western Christian mysticism. It's there too. It's in the Bible. If you look for it, you can find it. It's there, right? But the idea is that we have to create another aspect of our soul before we can turn around and look at the light. So how do we do that? How is that done? Some people feel it can be done through the ways of Aristotle or Plato by creating a school and being guided through tutorials and experiences, and it doesn't work.
Is that like
Rudolf
entering
Steiner-
the astral realms yourself in that course of study, you mean? To astral travel and turn around, or what would that have been like?
Well, if you're astral traveling, you're in the astral realm. You're not outside of the astral. You're flying around in the astral. It's not the same.
Okay.
It's not the same. So there's this idea that it's not so where does it come from? Or where do we get this, function of soul? And the idea is that there were three, and I think we've spoken about this before. Adam and Eve had three sons.
Yes.
There was Abel, there was Cain, and then there was Seth. Okay. And Seth was really the only child of Adam and Eve. The other two may have been twins through a violation of Eve by the archons or by these usurping gods. Regardless, so the Gnostics believed that there were three races that existed within the world. And one race was the race of Abel, the other race was the race of Cain, and the other race was the race of Seth. And how would you determine those lineages? Has nothing to do with your culture. It has nothing to do with your skin color. It has to do with your consciousness. And that's what the Gnostics believed. And so you had one group of people that were walking around in a very low vibration. And even though they were loved by God, they were favored by God, they were now living in a reality that they weren't really being protected by God anymore. So they were the ones that were the victims. And then you had the race of Cain. And then these were the people that were starting to become more clever and started manipulating things. So there's different ways to look at it. Freud had a very interesting insight. He said there's three functions to, let's say, the mind or the soul, call it what you want, but there was an id, an ego, and then there was something called a superego. And very interestingly, and I think accurately, he said within that ego is the center of all your phobias and fears. Okay. So, and that the id was more of an impulsive type of emotionally based intelligence. Superego was something above that, which is not very well defined in Freud's terms, but it does classify the mind or the mind soul in three different ways, right? So you got three different ways, all right? So the idea is that, we're moving through life through a very simple way, and then we move into a way where we develop this ego. And so for the last thousands of years, we've developed an ego. And what does an ego do? It likes to look at things outside of itself. It likes to classify things. It likes to project. It likes to manipulate. It likes to deceive. It does all of these things, to enhance the survival of the person who's doing it. It isolates you. The ego helps if you're living out of it. It isolates you in a solitary state. So and that you are living in a much more selfish and a much more service to self way, right? In that perspective. And you have a whole world of people that are players or people that are getting played. You have all of this. It's been going on for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The race of Seth is the race that came to know God, right? And so from a Gnostic perspective, you have the race of Abel, which is also, they're also called the people of the earth. And then you have the race of Cain, which are called the people of the intellect, the people of the mind.
Wow.
Okay. And then you have the race of Seth, and these are the people of the spirit. Now, Rudolf Steiner Rudolf Steiner was at the beginning, he was a theosophical member, and he was a theosophist, and then he split from the Theosophical Society and he created something called anthroposophy. But it's the same thing that he said, is that you have a sentient soul, a soul which is related to the people of the race of Abel, the people of the earth. And then you had an intellectual soul, which were the people of Cain, the race of Cain, the people of the intellect. But then he said that you have a third function of soul, and he called it consciousness soul, where your soul is now becoming more self-aware and starting to integrate things back into a more holistic view of life. And so he actually called it spirit-filled consciousness soul. Spirit-filled consciousness soul.
Interesting.
Well, also was very big on this was Carl Jung. And so Jung also talked about this. And he said that that process of developing a new function of soul is equated to like a little acorn growing into a mighty oak tree. He said that everything that you need in order for this to happen is already in you. The seed is already in you.
Right.
And so how do we do that? And he says, well, it's already in you. You don't have to go to school to figure this out.
No.
One of the things that he said is that this happens through our life experience, that the greatest school that we can experience is life on earth, an individual life on earth. Because as we're starting to find out, the earthly experience is a giant experiment, right? It's a giant experiment. You know, Dolores Cannon has talked about this and many others, that to get incarnated into this physical world is a great honor, and it's a great experience for any soul that's coming in to incarnate into it. So the ultimate school is life itself. And anytime a teacher, professor, a priest, or somebody comes in and says, okay, well, I'm going to create a school and I'm going to lead you to the truth, which is already in you, they're not helping. It's not, you're moving along a pathway. You may learn some stuff in there, but it's not going to get you to the point of being able to turn around and look at the light, because they're part of the, let's say, rulers or the astral realm, which is influencing you, which is casting the shadows, and you're still looking at the shadows cast on the wall as reality, right? And you're also not looking at yourself as a true co-creator. You are a co-creator. If you dabble in magic, you're dabbling in the astral realm, and you're inviting these energies into you, and you might be casting, stuff that might be cool. I don't know, but it might be productive. I don't know, but you're not really working with the light. You're not really turning around to the light. And so when we create that new function of soul, you might want to ask yourself, what feeds it? What feeds it? And the answer is, like Ralph Steiner says, it's spirit-filled consciousness soul. The light feeds it, right? So now we're developing this relationship, and we've talked about this many, many, many times. Is that our consciousness is now shifting from the mind, right, which is the source of the intellect, which is programmed knowledge in your head, to your heart. And by doing that, by moving into your heart, now you are moving into the realm of feeling, and that you're one stage closer to spiritual truth. You're the spirit. There's the heart itself. It is our greatest organ to sense love, right? It's our greatest organ that can sense love, right? And what is love? Love is the manifestation of the spirit. And so that's kind of how we cut through all of the lies and all of the deception, by moving into that heart-centered consciousness. And it's like, I always love this guy. He's the blind swordsman. I don't know if I've ever mentioned him. He's like one of my favorite characters in any movie. His name was Zato Ichi, and he was a Japanese character in Japanese movies. There was like 60 of these movies made in the 60s and 70s, and he was a Zen master. But the deal is that he was blind,
Mm.
he couldn't see. So he had to learn how to sword fight with all of his other senses. So they took the major sense away. And of course, he was the best swordsman in all of Japan, but
Wow.
no one could beat him. But it's because he learned to listen and he learned to develop his sixth sense, right? And so it's kind of like that. If we're moving into this more chaotic reality, and how we navigate through that, it has to be with a heart in a newer aspect of our soul. We have to live within that reality, within that aspect at all times. So people would ask, how do we develop it? And what schooling do I need for this? And it was Young who said, no, you don't do anything. He said two things. He said, there's something called the process of individuating, developing this newer soul function. And through the process of individuation, he called it, you become now an individuated aspect of God, in that sense, of a creational being that is no longer being controlled by those interfacing shadowy astral energies. And when asked how to do it, he said, engage in what he called active imagination. So we all
Nice.
can do this,
Yeah.
right? Through active. So we all have the capacity to do this, but in order to practice active imagination, you have to go through some kind of a creational experience. Because when we create, which is what we're doing, we're co-creating our reality. It can't be through a coloring book. I mean, I guess it could, but I mean, you can't follow the numbers. You can't paint by numbers. You can't follow any instructions. It has to be free form and it has to be creative, right? And so going through that creational process, which is coming back to source, is how this all begins, how we connect to that and how we write poetry or whatever it is that we do, build a building or plant a flower bed or a garden or whatever it is. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do here in this world, is we're supposed to be that interface of this creative interface between the physical and the spiritual. Humanity is right in the middle of all of
Wow. It's powerful. I was just going to reflect back and then I'd like you to continue. But when you talk about the Christ impulse, I feel that creative impulse. And of course, what is our school system? I mean, they get their hands on our kids and us too at a very early age, right? When we're still are creative and following those creative impulses. I mean, you watch any kid, it's just as natural as breathing, playing and creating, right? And then you get into the system and the system drums it out of you,
it.
right?
Yes.
And then they teach the teachers. I was a psych major and I can't remember the actual stage of development, but when they like stop believing in like the magical believing, right? It's like it's almost like a rite of passage. It's something they found in psychology, but they created. Talk about creating. They made it socially unacceptable to be believing in these things past a certain age. And then we have become adult kind of at like 7 or 8 or 9, right? And it's just interesting. I have memory of that in my childhood of seeing a lot of people not believing and just really getting into competition and getting into, the things that were preparing us to be the adults that this 3D matrix has wanted us to be. But I have, in my greatest trauma and my greatest soul evolution, when I was in, nothing from this world was solving that challenge that I had. That was an enduring challenge. That was, and we've talked about it before in other podcasts, that's the name of this channel on YouTube anyways, Color the Magic. That's when they invited me to the creative impulse. I was suffering so greatly. That was the guidance that came from my intuition, was color the magic. Now, it took me a little while to figure out, like, what does that even mean? But it really boils down to the creative impulse. I was invited to create. And not and like you said, not just like a dot to dot connect, in a book, but literally
Right.
like free form it. Free form it.
Freely
You
expressing.
create it,
Yes.
free express, freely express it. So powerful.
Well, yeah, and there's different theories behind the human development of a soul, of a child. There's theories in psychology. There's different theories behind that, but I think that the best ones are the ones that are related to the esoteric teachings, and that the human soul changes about every 7 years. It goes through a major shift, and I think that's related to Chiron. It's a chironic energy. Chiron takes about 50 years to make 49 years to make a circle. And during that time, about every 7 years, we're going through a major shift in awareness. But yeah, the things that they're doing as far as programming our children and getting them to critically think at ages that are actually extremely detrimental for them,
Yes.
instead of focusing on the more creative ways of thinking and the freer ways of thinking is extraordinarily detrimental. It's one of the worst things that they've done to our society over the last 30, 40 years was doing that. So, that's a real problem. But we're moving into this interesting plane of existence, and everything is kind of like starting to expose itself. And there's so the way that I see this is that is like over the last few months at the beginning of the year, the darkness is kind of like they're kind of like their alter ego is now being exposed. So artistically, what's happening is that the Pluto is crossed into Aquarius, right? And so they understand how the energies are working also. So they understand it. They wait until the energies are in certain alignments before they start making these moves. And I guess the only way that I can think about this is there was the movie, and it was actually an album, was written by a guy named Roger Waters, which was from Pink Floyd, right? And so Alan Parker made this movie with them, and it's basically an opera, which is called The Wall. And there's a very powerful scene in that movie where it's called In the Flesh. And it's when the alter ego of the lead character does a 180-degree reversal and exposes his, adoring fans to what he really is, or what this agenda is really all about. And it's about this massive totalitarian takeover of society. And it's in this film. And at the time that movie was made was like in the early 80s. You could see it more from a individual perspective, is that maybe this is what this guy was going through. But if you look at the work of Roger Waters, he's still alive today. He's been very critical of everything that's been going on. And he was sensing it already back then, that there was something very wrong with the educational system. There was something very wrong with everything. It wasn't just the educational system, the political system, everything. There was something really insidious lurking behind it. So I think it was the artists who have the ability to see past the veil, because they're the ones that are in the creative process. Like Jung said, they're engaged in this creative process, and they're individuating themselves as more freer individuals that are now in charge of the creative process. And what they're starting to see through this active imagination that they go through was quite frightening. In fact, I think that in the future, if you want to, or even in the past, if you want a really good, accurate assessment of what was really happening, like in the time of the Cathars, when they were being exterminated, don't read the history books. There's not much there. They wiped everybody out. And the people that were targeted, they didn't have much to say. It was just the people that were crucifying them and that were oppressing them. They were the ones that got to write the history books. Well, there were the minstrels and there were the poets, and their testimonies survived. So if you want to find what really happened, read the poems, read the stories, read the little bitty, inscriptions that they left behind, because that's really where the truth exists. And I think that if you're not waking up now, I mean, I don't know what it's going to take to wake you up, but that is really what I think he was already sensing is, and I think that what we're going through right now is just like the song In the Flesh, is like, okay, this is what was being, held back, but we're not holding it back anymore. Here we are. And this is what we're going to do. And in that scene, is that they expose themselves, the people who, this loving throng of well, let's say fans or teenagers or whoever these kids are now close, they're closed off in this room, and now they start telling them what he starts telling them what we're going to do, and you are basically enslaved, and that we are, we're going to make everyone the same, and anyone who stands out from our image of a dutiful citizen is going to be killed. He in the song.
No distinction. No distinction.
Well, there is a distinction. If you stand out from the drones, then yes, and that's the whole point of the story of the wall is that put them up against the wall, and what happens when they put you up against the wall? They execute you. The next scene is called Run Like Hell. That's literally the name of the song, Run Like Hell, because those who escape, it's just like Plato's image. Those that are in there, that are stuck in that you're either going to conform to it, or you're going to run like hell. You're going to get out of that scenario. And I think we're sensing that energy right now. So
can I also add to what you're saying? Yes. Also, is that when people are trying to understand, like say there are beings that are like deep descendants of Cain. They may have no idea that that's deep in their ancestry.
We're all descendants of Cain, all of us, and we're all descendants of Abel. We've all been all of it through those perspectives of soul. We've all done it. We all were being played at one time, and we were all players at one time. So, and that interplay between Cain and Abel never ends. That is the definition of the third density existence. Wow. It's this power struggle that never ends, this enslavement that never ends.
But so then you add the descendants of Seth in that picture, yes, which we've all been all three of those things, is what you're probably saying too. Yes?
Yes. Well, no, I mean, maybe let's say that for every human being who's living here on this earth right now, if you came from another world and you lived in an ascended reality, a fifth dimensional or higher reality, then yes, you have lived as in that race of Cain, or maybe even not race of Cain, race of Seth, or right, maybe even of them. But you might not have lived at that plane on the earth. Maybe you did in Atlantis or Lemuria. That's a possibility also. You might have. Or maybe you're only incarnated into this earth and nowhere else. You may not have experienced it yet. Or maybe, and so that may be where those teachings would be even more important to try to convey to people is that there is there's another, let's say, aspect of soul to step into. But in order to do that, you have to negate everything that you were told. You have to walk away from all of the things that you've gained living as a member of the race of Cain. You have to walk away. You have to be sick and tired of the game. You have to be sick and tired of the violence and the
Well, it's
deception
the
and all that other stuff.
transcending, which is the ending the
You have
trance.
to transcend it. Yes.
So
Yes.
the one of the points I think I was going to make is that also people who have not left the matrix, people who have not turned away from the teachings, knowing that that is not really the ultimate truth, the absolute truth of who we really are. Is that what you have? Do you have people that are that have more predominantly the energy of the children of Cain, that are so intellectually, it's so easy to be fooled? That's my opinion. When you're only, operating from the mind, which can be tricked in so many different ways, from the projector that you're not quite sure who's showing the light, right? But when you feel,
Yes.
you have access to much more information. So it's why just put 2 people in a room, or you could put 100 people in a room, but you could have people that they are coming from a place that they truly believe that like the children of the intellect, the people of the intellect, are going to speak that kind of speak. And to each other, it all makes sense. But if you enter feelings, like, that's ridiculous. That's like child's play, right? Grown-ups, right?
Absolutely.
And,
Yes.
then you have the people who are feeling and saying, how are these people that are so up in their intellect and academic and all of these things, why can't they hear me? Right? And you have this
Yes. Yes.
conversation, but this chasm between, because it doesn't ever synaptically connect yet. 2
No,
different
I don't
worlds.
think it's going. Yes. So you used a really interesting word in a couple of transmissions ago. You said a vituation, or you used
Vitiate.
this word.
Vitiate.
Vitiate,
Yeah.
vitiate,
Vitiate.
vitiate. When you when you said it, I'm like, what does that mean? But I want to read this because you said that fraud vitiates everything that is not true in the eyes, hearts, mind, and soul of God. You wrote that. Okay. And I would say that, yes. And from a conscious soul perspective, I would say that not only that, but I would say that this fraud, that, or whatever it is that doesn't resonate in the mind, heart, and soul of a child of God in consciousness soul, right? So it's not like I'm separate in
No.
that sense, and I have to discern whether or not it resonates, in the soul of God, because in my soul, God exists. You see, God doesn't have a soul from our perspective. He inhabits our soul. He lives within the enlightened element, this new consciousness soul. So you even said it in this transmission when you talk about the soul of God, and you talk about this vitiation, or this vitiates, which means to debase.
Yes.
Right? It means to debase or destroy or to corrupt. Right? What a word. You just all of a sudden started using this word vitiates.
It's a beautiful word, because anything that's false vitiates itself. And anything
Yes.
that's not vitiating itself, the light, fraud vitiates everything, but the light comes behind and cleans up anything that is not truth either. It's like they're actually working in that way. Anything that's false is being obliterated from both sides.
I got a word for you too. It's called apostasy. Apostasy.
Whoa. What is that?
So apostate or apostasy. It means the falling away, or in the Greek term, or in the Greek meaning, it means the defecation from truth.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So all of a sudden we have these, because that came to me before I listened to your lecture, or to your video. And it came to me kind of serendipitously. I was just listening, reading something, and I went, oh, wow, what's this word mean? And so I started reading about it. So, and I think now we're listening to these more biblical, or these very descriptive terms, which are much more religious. Okay, because that's now the time that Pluto has just crossed into, is this age of Aquarius, and the energies of Aquarius, right? And it's reconfiguring our spirit, our spiritual life, our spiritual relationships, not just internally, but to everything else, to the world itself. And so this word apostasy, the falling away from truth, and a person that was called an apostate or apostate. It's a hard word for me to say, but that was a person who renounces their faith.
Mm.
Now, and they were heretics back in like thousands of years ago. You're apostate. You're a heretic. You're falling away. You're falling away from your faith. But it cuts both ways. It cuts
Okay.
both ways. So, in order for you to, it's like shedding a snake skin,
Yes.
right? You have to shed that skin, right? And so there's two paths or two groups that are it's gone beyond the physical. Now we're going into the spiritual elements of things, right? And so in one group, if you are falling away from one group, which is the lower reality or the lower density, right? You're a heretic to them. There's no reconciliation. So you said all of those people that are part of the race of Cain or live within their intellectual soul, they can never relate to you, right? But the same thing is happening from a higher perspective. And from the higher perspective is that we can't live within that the confinement of that jail cell, of that cave. And once you see the light, and once you see what's casting those shadows, you can never ever go back to living as a slave anymore. It can't be done.
No.
No. And that's how biblical things have gotten. We're never going backwards now. We can't. And so, what is it? I mean, some people feel that there was a covenant with God that was made, at the conception of the human species, of the human being. Why? Because we're called the children of God, right? We are known as the children of God. Why? Because we have this creative impulse that comes from the light of truth. We carry it within us.
Yes, I like that. This creative impulse that comes from the light of truth.
Yes.
Powerful.
And we're now developing this soul, or we have developed this soul that's filled with the light of truth, filled with the spirit of the light of truth, or filled with this spirit, what we've called spirit-filled consciousness soul, right? So we have that. But over the last 3+ years, there have been an overwhelming number of people that have broken the covenant with God. And they've fallen out.
Yeah.
And the decisions that they've made might be irreversible. I don't know. It might be irreversible. So they have lost their faith in the certainty that in the light is where their eternal soul exists. So they've lost that connection by making decisions that are aligning them into a perpetual existence within the shadows for as long as possible. For maybe eternity, I don't know, but for as long as that matrix exists, they're making decisions that are aligning them into that matrix where they will not be able to extract themselves. They will not be able to turn around and face the light because they won't have the genetics, they won't have the infrastructure or the makeup to anymore to do that, because what the decisions they're making is changing the nature of their own self, of the species itself, of humanity itself. And we're morphing into something completely different, one way or another. We can't go back to what we were. So we're either becoming more spiritually aligned, developing a new function of soul, and living within that new function of soul, which is now nourished even greater and more, even more aligned with the heavenly realms or the spiritual realms from whence we come from, or we're shutting it off by the decisions that we're making. Yes, many people are being manipulated into making the decisions, but we're shutting it off, and in that perspective, we're defecating. We're a defecation from the ultimate truth, which is who we are as children of God. You see, so you're an apostate to that the covenant that you all were born into as a child of God, right? So now you're falling away from that higher knowledge, that higher realm, and it's irreconcilable. You can't. I think we're at the point now where this is what's happening now as Pluto's entered into this, Aquarian timeline. It's all separating. I think it's separating even more and more, and I don't think there's any reconciliation anymore. I think that one group is seeing it, like you said before, as truth. Another group is seeing it from a completely different perspective from truth. And there's no point of trying to reconcile or find a middle ground, because there is no middle ground. It's one or the other.
Many podcasters, and it's even come through recent messages, whether it was me on a Marinades or whether it came through direct messaging, but that there's no more fence sitting anymore. There really are choice points to be made. There's no fence to sit on. It's just becoming very obvious that people, even by lack of action, if they're not choosing God, they're choosing the other, right? And I was going to say, are you seeing this in some of the way you're describing that as like if we had the fall from grace that was, people have talked about for eons and eons of time. Is this a second fall from grace? So people may descend and devolve further, and some are in the return. So are some descending in a deeper fall from grace, a second fall from grace, like at this critical time in the world's history? And some are on the pathway back, the great return. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think we could look at it from that way, and we can say that, we had to go on this journey, and we had to develop an ego. So in the fall from grace, let's say like you described your experience in Lemuria, right? And everything was awesome in Lemuria, right? It was
high frequency living, high frequency living in union,
high frequency living
source.
And the closest thing that you can possibly come to heaven on earth was in Lemuria. And we were being taught or stewarded by beings from other worlds, specifically from the Pleiades. And so they lived, the gods lived amongst us, you see. And so we had the capacity to connect to them. And we had this really powerful connection to each other, because we lived in this more communal existence, more heartfelt existence. But we didn't have a great power of discernment, because we were relying on gods to steward us, or higher evolved beings. And so we had to go through this process. We had to go through this fall, I think, in order to develop the ability to see and to calculate and to discern better, right? And that's the fall from grace. That's one way to look at it. Yes, we were tempted by the snake, which represents Lucifer, and we ate from the snake, and now we have the knowledge of good and evil, because we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that represents our capacity to discern the difference between good and evil, between right and wrong, between black and white, right? And so because of that, we get kicked out of the garden, and we're orphaned, you know, from that society. But if you have to go through these experiences, however unpleasant they are. Let's say that you were a loving being from Lemuria, and you were super positive about everything, right? And you were this heartfelt being, and you lived in this love consciousness. And then Lemuria sank, by the way, and I want to get to that, but I want to finish this thought. So you wind up living. You died in your instance. You got overwhelmed. You got flooded out, right? Is that what happened, or something happened where you saw yourself going? But you
Yes,
saw the faces of your mentors serenely accepting it. But
totally at peace.
you totally, but you were like, why?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Okay, so that happens, right? So now every time you incarnate into this world, you try to recreate your Lemurian experience, or you live from your heart, right? You have this heart-centered person, right? And you live from positivity. Well, you find out it doesn't work in this lower reality. You know, and it happens over and over and over again as these cultures start to flourish that were more heart-centered, or as a voice of truth actually shows up and says, you know, you're all slaves. To a certain degree, Socrates says the same thing, you know, and what do? They executed him too, right? So once you start seeing these deeper truths, they wipe you out. They kill you. But
So when you
that
turn and face the
tempers your.
light, many people who have turned and looked, found a way to turn and look, they're taken out of the matrix. The matrix can't have people turning around.
Yeah, but you know, we're in this giant school and we're learning these lessons, and every single one of these lessons is invaluable. And so you can say, after this experience, well, hopefully the school is just about ready to be dismissed. Summer vacation, we're
Yes.
almost out. But the fact is that you know the face of evil now, and you know what it's capable of, and because you've been a victim of it for so long, right? But you have to know the light, and you have to know the dark. You have to know how it all operates in order for us to graduate from this school. Because once we become more independent, we become more godlike, right? And nobody's going to be able to pull a wool over our eyes anymore. We're going to be able to discern what's going on, you know, way before, you know. I mean, we can, like I said in that essay that I wrote, if you're living from your heart and you're realizing what isn't resonating well with your heart, which is love-based, you can identify it as there's something wrong there. Now you need your mind to really look into this deeper and say, okay, now what is it that my heart is telling me isn't right, right? So we become more balanced. We've become greater in that sense.
Yes.
So we had that sentient soul. Then we had that, you know, that intellectual soul. Now we're going to take the summation of all of those things, and we're developing this higher level of consciousness soul. So your question about the fall from grace, right? And that is this another fall from grace? I don't think it's another fall from grace. I don't think it's, because that already happened. We fell from grace.
But the people who are in their intellect that aren't turning back to the light, is that
okay?
For those souls, another fall?
So there's another song, and it was called Atlantis. And it was written by this guy. His name was Donovan. I don't know if you know who Donovan was, but he wrote, like, you know, all these really trippy songs back in the 60s. He was like, they said he was like the UK's version of Bob Dylan, right? He was very folky, but he had some real trippy songs, you know, and Sunshine, Superman, and Mellow Yellow, and all these really interesting, funny songs. But he wrote this song called Atlantis. And in the song, he gives you a little, like, he like maybe for 2 minutes, he he gives you a oral history of Atlantis. It's one of the most accurate histories I've ever heard. It was like, wow, you know, I mean, like Blavatsky herself or Casey himself taught him that, you know, all of these things. So he must have been an Atlantean soul. But so this is what's happening, I think. I think that we're going through another cataclysm. It's like Lemuria, like Atlantis. And you mentioned one of your favorites, Noah, in your last transmission. You talked about Noah, right? And so it's hitting, and we're going through whatever this is. We're on the verge of something. But I will tell you right now that in Atlantean times or in Lemurian times, it was common knowledge that the continent was sinking, or that there was going to be a massive catastrophe. It was common knowledge that there was going to be a massive flood. It's a question of whether or not you're listening. It's a question of whether or not you believe it, because you're either in a higher frequency, and in the higher frequency, nothing's going to get past us. I'm just waiting for some of you guys to tell me, hey, Paul, this is it, you know, and let's move on. But I think that in itself is going to be different. I'll talk about that in a minute. But no one was caught completely by surprise if their consciousness had shifted, if they were living in a greater level of truth. There in the Lemurian, and like apparently what happened in Lemuria, from some of the stories that I've heard, is a major percentage of people immigrate or migrated off. They got off of Lemuria well before the continent sank. They knew it was going down, but some stayed, but others, there was a mass migration before it happened. Atlantis got like kind of sideswiped by a war, apparently. I'm not exactly sure the details. There's all kinds of stories behind it. But before it happens, they started colonizing the other areas of the world, because there were people that knew that it was going down, and that the continent would be destroyed. But it's like today, you can say to most people, you know, we're going down. It's all going to fall apart. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going down. I think a large percentage of people say you're nuts. It's not going to happen. Right? They can't feel it. They can't see it.
Well, the great shift of the ages, even like that's a title. I mean, other people, it's not my title, but it's what I entitled it. And a lot of people are like, whatever, like there's no shift.
Ever.
Right?
There's no shift. Right. So, but it doesn't just happen where the entire population is totally unaware, right? There's always people that are going to be aware of actually what's happening. My question is I don't see anywhere to run, and there's nowhere on the earth anymore to run. Like in Atlantis, we could go to Spain or whatever, the coast of North America or whatever, and we might be able to survive there. Or in Lemurian times where it just sunk, then you know, they went to the west coast of the United States, they went to Asia, they went all over the place. They found safe harbor there. But where are we going to go? And I see it behind you. You know, you said emission is only by vibration only. That was another one of your lectures, right?
We have to vibrate up. We have to vibrate up.
Right. But has anyone done it yet?
I think we're in process. I think that's the ascension which is the rising. But you'd have to know about the different peoples that you described so well today to see what's gotten us so entrenched on this planet in different ways of thinking and being, and to get to a place where we know we're ascending beyond that doesn't have the answers. You can stay in duality for forever and just be on that treadmill again and again. I think some of us are getting the cue that we need to, it's through perception, which is also coming from our vibration, which can come from our heart centers, that Christos, that you say the logoic light of truth. It's leading some people in a direction that we can't see, but we're taking steps in that direction vibrationally, consciously. I don't know. That's my sense, is that we're ascending out in consciousness, right? We're ascending beyond in consciousness.
And I think it's happening to so many people, but there's this big but there.
I heard it.
We're still operating in a dense reality. We're you know, so I think that there's got to be a transformation. And I think that it's going to happen to a lot of people. And I think that when it happens, they're going to have to be very visible. They're going to be visible. Even to those that are still kind of like in that, maybe there's still a time of transition or transition period where there's still some that haven't made the jump yet. There's still, I think, going to be a core group of people that just aren't going to do it. But there's going to have to be something that's going to happen. What it is, I don't know. But I do know that they're going to have to be visible, meaning that you're going to run into these people and they're going to be able to communicate to you without speaking. And they're going to be able, the countenance of their face, you know, is going to be totally different than what you've ever experienced before. It's going to happen this way. At least that's what it's promised to happen this way. So when whatever this transformation is, that it's like we're not shifting off the planet. That's the one thing that we've been told, is that we're not shifting off the planet. Neither are we supposed to die in that sense. So there's going to have to be like maybe millions of people that go through that first wave of transition that will be so different than everyone else, and they will be so attractive to everyone else, who are starting to align into that polarity and into that consciousness soul. But until they become visible, and until there's a significant number of people, I think we're still in limbo. I don't really see much changing. You know, I mean, there's a lot of spiritually aligned people that are walking around that are still still locked into the matrix as I am, right? So we haven't seen evidence of that yet. We haven't seen. I mean, I've had extraordinary experiences, but I know that I have to come back and still live in this density for I don't know how long. But there certainly isn't anywhere to run away in this density to somewhere else. That doesn't exist. So I think we're going to have to go through that experience before any major change is going to happen here on Earth. No.
I was just going to say, in the circles where I travel, people that I know and the things I've been led to in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, right? In this window of time that you're describing, I am in the experience of some people that are beginning to rise, and it's hard to explain. And but I feel I'm feeling it in myself that another consciousness is coming in, and almost like the 3D Earth planet, because it's so filled with illusion. Once you start really making this flip or this shift, it's less and less relevant. It's just like how they talk about, you know, how the dollar is worth less and less and less, right? Whereas back in the day, 1913 is worth 100 pennies, you know, it was worth $1. A dollar was worth $1. And now it's worth 2 to 3 cents on the dollar, right? And there's that process over this 100+ years that is it's just worth less and less. If we can apply that same awareness, because people are shifting in consciousness, I'm experiencing some of that where the shifts in consciousness are taking place already. And the illusion is worth less and less and less to people who are waking up. And I would not have said that in the Lemurian me, because I must have been up in my intellect or something, because I was still shocked in the way that it happened, right? I was still caught in instead of like the peace that they already knew. I think there's something that's transpiring in the shift of the ages that is happening. And I think as more people, it's like the Schumann resonance, but as more people anchor this in, it's all I'm saying is this is very possible that it's already happening. And I think there may be some godlike interventions, just like the people in Moses' day. They had no idea that God was going to part the waters. If that literally happened, but they couldn't have foreseen, it was unforeseen, but they knew that something epic that God was going to do, or that, right, that was going to happen, was going to lead them to a new life, a new plane of consciousness, and liberated from at least the enslavement they had just left. So I feel like there's something that we can't yet see, but more of us are moving in that direction, whether we're quantum leaping or it's incremental shifts and choices that we're making every day. Our vibrations are changing, our attractions are changing. And I just want to put that out there. I wonder how many people listening to our podcast would feel like, would express that too, that the illusion is worth less and less. It's becoming less and less relevant, just like the dollar in its own way is becoming less and less relevant, which means its value is less and less. And maybe that is also what's transpiring in this window of time as well. That people may not say, I'm ascending, I've made the choice, this is my soul path. I don't know that everybody are feeling it that way, but I think what's also happening is that they're recognizing the absurdity of what's going on in the news, like the craziness in the world. And it's so bizarre to many more people now, not everybody, but more people, that it's just less and less and less relevant to the reality that I myself am creating and that you yourself can be creating. And when we start activating as creators and we follow that creative impulse that's connected with the light of truth, that's informed by the light of truth, it is shifting things.
If you're in a society or a culture or a group that's going through the experience,
Yes.
right? That's the falling out. That's the, and unless you're, but if you're embedded in a dense, reality, a culture that isn't really resonating with it, there's no chance that you're going to be able to, I think, make a difference now at this point, unless something extraordinary happens.
Right.
See, and it might happen, it might not happen. I mean, I don't know. Now you mentioned something really interesting in your last transmission. You talked about you said this in your transmission. You said that you are the light of the world. You did say that in your last,
Yes.
the last one that I saw, that you're the world. So that's true. But when Jesus taught us that, he said that you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. But then he asked this question, it's almost rhetorical. He said, but who would put a light under a basket? Why would you hide the light? If you're the light of the world, why are you hiding it? And so there's different ways to maybe interpret that. But I want to ask him, okay, if we're the light of the world, why is it still hidden? Why aren't we more visible?
Yeah.
Right? Why aren't the people who are moving into that perspective, why isn't there more visibility? And maybe there is, I mean, things like Dolores Cannon says the same thing, is that your light, that you maybe can't see yet, is having an effect in stabilizing, all of the people around you. That's a possibility. And certainly you can't be afraid to hide your light. That's for sure also. And then I think that's a very alchemical statement, because alchemy is based on salt and sulfur. And when he mentions the salt of the earth and the light of the world, he's actually mentioning it's an alchemical formula that he actually states.
I see.
Is that, and that the unification of your polarity, this light is the masculine and the sulfur is heat, and it's also light, because in the alchemical reaction, that's what you use as a source of flame. And then the salt is it's like a battery. It's the salt of the earth, which is itself has electrical potential, right? It's the battery, and that's the feminine principle. but they're only united through Mercury, the Mercurius, Mercury. What is the Mercury? Mercury is the spirit. And so when you add these things together, he's basically talking about the spirit working through a person who's unified their polarities and now is living within a higher aspect of soul in a spiritual awareness, so to speak. And so that's definitely I completely agree with. And then the question is how do we get there? And then Mike, most of the lecture, what did you say? You said
Conscious breathing.
conscious breathing. Yes.
There's something, and I don't know that everybody feels it when they hear it come through those messages, but for me, it's one and the same. When we are conscious about our breathing, we're accessing this other dimensional fortification, this godlike energy. You leave linear time. You can transcend the confines of the enslavement that we've been trapped in. And we're all breathing every day. We've already probably talked about this in other podcasts, but there's something about consciously knowing you are connected to something so much more, which is turning to me and looking at the light, right? The source of the light. When we're consciously breathing, we're connected with the source of the light. And therefore, your vision is totally different. Your perceptions, the way you move in the world. But when we're just breathing air, we're just looking at the wall, right? Yes. So I truly believe you transcend this world with conscious breathing and other things, of course, but conscious choices and all of that. But I truly believe it is a major, major step to the transcendence. And people, if you're saying, okay, fine, I'll consciously breathe, but you're not really feeling it, this goes back to the heart. If you're just going through the motions, this is where, to some degree, I don't know that faking it till you make it, because you have to enliven it with your consciousness. When you enliven it, the best example of this to some degree is in the movie Hook with Robin Williams. At least with the conscious breathing I'm talking about, where someone's going through the motions and somebody's actually feeling it. Those are two different experiences. One's going to still be looking at the wall and saying nothing happened. And the other one that's consciously breathing with full feeling, full connection, is going to be powered up at a different frequency. But in the movie Hook with Robin Williams, he's at the table and his kids have been kidnapped. I don't know. Do you remember that movie at all, Paul? Yeah, his kids have been kidnapped and he can't get them back unless he flies and he fights
Captain Hook.
Captain Hook.
Captain Hook.
Right, he has to fight Captain Hook. But he's looking at these lost boys and saying, this is absurd. There is absolutely no food here. There's nothing here. Yeah, okay, that's funny that you all think you're eating, but I just don't want to pretend to eat. I actually want to really eat. And they're saying, so play, Peter. If you play, you'll be eating with us. And he just can't for a segment of the film. He just doesn't get it. And then all of a sudden, something happens. He's with them enough that he pretends to shoot some food into their face, right? And he's just playing. He almost catches himself off guard. He leaves his ego, he drops it in that moment, and he just is complete spirit. He's totally in his heart space. And when he flings this food on them and he sees it actually finally land on their face, he entered that state of consciousness that could access that as a living reality. And I think that's what's happening with conscious breathing. But the person, if two people sit next to each other on a bench and they're looking at the same wall and they both feel like they're incarcerated in the world, but one just goes to this, said, okay, so we just have to consciously breathe. So they're just kind of pretending to consciously breathe. That's kind of like the Peter Pan and the Hook analogy that I'm making, at least now. You can't just go through the motions. You have to, something in the spirit has to spark inside you, where the other person sitting there is just like, okay, I'm going to consciously breathe. But they go into the feeling of what it would be like to feel, to breathe the essence of God inside them. And if they can bring that alive with all of their senses, they're having two totally different experiences. One just transcended the wall and found the light. And one is still sitting there and saying, why do I even try this crap? Right? This doesn't work.
Right. And as I said, everything that we need is within us. It's all there. It's in well, you want to say DNA, but the analogy of a seed, that has everything that's needed, and it has to start to grow, and it has to start to mature in that sense. And as that element of soul starts to awaken and starts to develop, I always said it, my experience, I didn't do anything in order to become enlightened. I said it was as easy as taking a breath. And I find that it's still there. So I think that when the shift happens, there's nothing you can do to really prepare for it. I mean, it's just a question of stepping into it,
Yes.
of breathing into it, like you talk about. But I mean, it's not like I do conscious breathing intentionally, but I think I live in a conscious breath. So, and there are times where I emphasize it, that there's a moment in my life where I want to memorialize it, and I want to mark it. And then I will do something along the lines of a conscious breathing, but it's a connection that you can make.
It
And
is.
remember that who we are, we are this, you talk about the breath as God coming into us, and that's basically what it is. And we're basically this interface between heaven and earth. And that's really where it lives. It lives in that interface. And that interface really is heart-centered. It's always been heart-centered, because
Always.
that center subtle body, this center subtle body that controls the rhythm of our heart, and it controls our breathing, the rhythmic functions of our body. That's really where our consciousness should be shifting. And like you said, when you're consciously breathing, you're kind of stepping outside of the linear time continuum in that sense, and that you're
Yes.
living in a more timeless way. So I that's the only thing I can come up with too, is that somehow or another it's related to letting go. Somehow or another it's related to step outside of the mind and living within the heart. There's nothing else I can say, other than living within love and not allowing fear to take control of you, because the fear exists here, it doesn't exist here, right?
And fear is at
I,
some
I
level, to me, I know fear is a feeling, but it's also a mental construct. It's something in your patterning in your mind that creates that feeling of fear that's a match. But for me, playfulness, kind of like the Robin Williams example, or the person who can get into like the full-on feeling of God breathing them. Sometimes we do almost have to become like the child whose actual divine development was on course before education and all these other systems got in and disrupted it. It's almost like we have to go back to that child who knows how to breathe. We've probably said this before, but I watch my animals, they naturally belly breathe. But most adults, like, they breathe for almost like the chest up. It's not a full breath. And so whether people give this much thought to breathing or not, even if you were just playful and you were willing to give yourself a full belly breath, feel the difference between that and just the shallow breathing that most people do to get by. If you keep breathing that way, you will keep getting by, because you're missing the point that God's partnering with you in every single breath together. And it can be this transcendent experience where you might be walking in 3D land, taking a bus, getting in your car, going grocery shopping, but you could be journeying with God the whole time, right? Partnering with God in all these ways, in which case you're then having an other dimensional experience while your feet are still walking to some degree in a 3D planet. And as the more people who learn how to do this and really embody it, I do think there are shifts. I do think there's going to be interventions. I do think there's going to be some biblical moments of things that we can't foresee, but we know the power and presence of God, and we know this timing on the planet with all the astrology and all the shift of the ages and everything else that's going on. There's going to be some kind of divine assistance, like you're saying, that affects a whole group of people, that all of a sudden they're activated in a way that they couldn't have foreseen, but it happened, right? So some of us had our own unique cataclysms in our own lives that brought us to this level of seeking source, of unifying in the breath, of connecting at this deep level and seeing other worlds through that consciousness. But for the masses that still have not awakened or chosen this in their life, I think there's an event that's designed. And some people at some level, if there's this mass consciousness that still has to go through this process, it's almost like as a soul group, they must have known there's going to be this time when this all happens and you'll go through it with everyone. And there probably were points of like choice points for our souls. Some of us knew you're going to go through this pretty wicked spell in your life, and something's going to shatter or cause you to question everything that you thought you believed. Some people chose to go through that experience early, to maybe be facilitators of a consciousness or whatever, to be a conduit of knowing this at this point. But I truly trust that there's a whole segment of the world's population that is going to turn when some incredibly biblical events take place. I truly believe there's going to be a coinciding, a convergence of a readiness that's being prepared in the masses and an event that helps tip the scales. So all of a sudden they have a birth, like they breathe their first real breath their whole life, even if they're 80, right? They've been saying, I've been breathing my whole life. No, they haven't really breathed until they have a conscious breath, a God breath. I think that's coming. I think there's an event that's going to catalyze that God breath, and people will know the difference. And after you consciously breathe a God breath, breathing a regular, shallow 3D breath, there's no comparison. And breath corresponds to consciousness. So what I'm saying about the breath also has to do with the consciousness people have inside them. When they start breathing more in this way, they will be accessing another realm, and the 3D matrix that previously gripped their attention is going to become irrelevant, but en masse. Do you know what I'm saying? That's a possibility. That's what I sense.
I think
Well,
so too. I think it's related to, again, to the metaphor of, it's like something happens to us through an experience outside of the reality of the linear time continuum, whether that's a near-death experience or whether that's a dream
yes.
or whatever
Yes.
whatever it is. And it's like a lightning strike. It's like this amazing amount of awareness that's just, it's like you're turned on at that
Yes.
point. But in retrospect, when I go back and I say, well, what did I do to trigger it? And I said, I did absolutely nothing but just exist. And it was as natural as taking a deep cleansing breath. That's all it was. That was it. So I think that it's not going to be, it can't be. It can't be some kind of great external thing. It can't be like 1,000 spaceships flying over my house, or the Jesus, walking on water, across Lake Michigan or something. It can't be outside of us. It has to be an intrinsic experience to convey to us our relationship to the eternal, or
Yes.
to a higher aspect of ourselves. There has to be some kind of revealing that we have to go through, and it would be most effective if it was collective, at least for a large group, whether
Yes.
that's the minority of people, whatever it is. And I'd like to think that everyone deserves to have the experience. The question is after the experience, how it's interpreted is totally up to the soul, whether they're prepared to accept it for what it is, or to spin it in a different way that is kind of like enslaved to their awareness, to the awareness that they choose to live within. So, but I think that I've been saying this forever, that there has to be something like that in order for us to move forward. Otherwise, nothing makes any sense. We just can't have this huge hijack, where the alter ego of all of these archons and evil people show their true faces and say, wow, we're just going to take over everything and you don't have a chance. That's what they're saying. But I think they're being forced into doing this because I think they realize some awakening is just around the corner. They just want to get as many people on board with their agenda as they can, or to impair our capacity to experience it, you know, from an individual perspective, as they can, so that there'll still be a remnant of people that will still buy into their whatever the agenda is that they're trying to sell us. But you're right, I completely agree. From my perspective, value is dramatically changing. Money is an abstraction. It makes no sense anymore. Because, you know, I mean, I don't, whatever you're charging, I just look at it and I go, this is, I don't know what this is anymore. You know, whatever. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it has no value anymore. And it's almost like I can see money almost like just evolving out of our life, or at least going to some kind of a token economy where it's not a major concern anymore, as long as you're contributing to the well-being of your, not only yourself, but everyone else. And you will thrive in whatever society it is that's supposed to show that we managed to create. But no, even they say no one even knows what that's going to be yet. It's never happened before. So
And
we'll
yet I
see.
think a higher consciousness is summoning it in, and it is even being built. That frequency is already gaining traction, because the people who come, who are connected to the God heart, maybe it's the children of Seth light coming through some of us, it is manifesting. So I think what's beautiful in all that we're saying is, for me, I'm not expecting some outside source outside of me either to save me, right? To save the world. But I do think it's going to be in cooperation with source, with the galactics, with higher dimensional beings, however people view that in their own ways. I think fraud is vitiating itself. It's it's just destroying itself, which is why many of us, I think now we can see with a little bit of hindsight why things didn't happen the way we might have wanted them to. Why did we have to go through the tests that we have in the last few years, and how that's been challenging, but also strengthened us in some ways. I think that's sort of how the writings of Sun Tzu, right? The art of war is almost like, don't interfere with an enemy destroying itself. Don't interfere with fraud vitiating itself. It will erase itself from the planet if you have the faith and fortitude to endure as it does that thing. And then what I also sense, though, is simultaneous to that, is that the light is infusing this planet. As the fraud vitiates itself, it just dematerializes itself. It sort of self destructs. I think the light is also coming in and cleaning up any lingering debris that doesn't belong in a higher frequencied consciousness. And we're here, we're going to be going through, as that all alchemizes on the planet, we're living through that. I don't think it's going to be a lot of people just disappearing from the planet, like when Lemuria sank and Atlantis sank, and we had to come back and live other lifetimes and do it again. I think there's so many things we're pulling in today, but Wayne Dyer talks about this experience of dying while you're alive. We're dying to the old allegiance to a system and a world that was an illusion in the first place, based largely in serpentine foundations and principles. And if we all colluded with the illusion for long enough to get to this point, when enough people, it's just the same thing with the currency. If it's backed by nothing, and essentially the dollar kind of is, and there are other currencies around the world that have faced this, it's only the belief of the people that keep it circulating at all. So when the people no longer believe in the dollar, it will die while we're still alive, right? It will just vitiate itself. And then in this new higher consciousness, when people wake up and say, why would we ever have allowed a currency to never be backed by anything that's real? We will summon in that experience, which is, I think, is already happening to some degree, whether it's precious metals coming in, commodities, tokens that are backed by commodities and other real assets. But I think it's truly happening. And I think what's so good for people to know is, anybody that's listening to a podcast and still to the end with us now, is to know that we're not alone, that there are other people who are seeing this new reality, this new realm, this new consciousness having its birth. And we are breathing some new prana in it. And the more people can value breathing the new prana and making like that fully coming alive in their sentient system, we are making the old system worthless and irrelevant. And I think that's a big part of what's going to transcend this, but there's probably some kind of real-time catalysmic type event that gets the attention of people, and en masse, everybody experiences something. And we'll have to see, because that part's the mystery. Just like the Red Sea parting, they didn't know that piece, but they were trusting Moses and his connection and guidance or whatever, and their inner guidance to follow him and go on that journey. I think some people are already knowing that God and the benevolent beings of creation are probably prepared to orchestrate some pretty significant events, and then the world will breathe together in a majority, in cooperation, all knowing the value of that, somehow downloading into them around the same time. And there may still be some beings on the planet that, for whatever reason, their soul is just not going to turn to that, right? And that they go through another cycle in some other way somehow. And a lot more has to get revealed. Obviously, we both know that. But the people willing to breathe where God is and feel that in your life as an activated consciousness, then we are contributing to the 3D matrix's irrelevance, which means God's creation is what's relevant. It is what has value. It's what always has been, like the blueprint in the seed that becomes the oak tree. We are aligning back with that truth, and we give zero life force to the matrix as it is, even if we hear terrible revelations coming out, because I think that will still be the case. I can go on and on about this, and I just was leaving this message for the Marinades message that I'll post at least this Saturday. We can be sieves. It's like being a vibrational sieve of the darkness, that we see it, we witness it, but we don't give any attention, because when we give our energy to it, we give it form. And the best thing we can do is just let it vitiate itself. Just let it vitiate itself, get exposed and vitiated, right? Disappearing from our reality. Because I think God's creation has been here the whole time. It's been this like strange holographic or whatever it is, this like false complete theater. And when the theater of God's creation falls away, what's left is God's creation. So it's a powerful time. And it requires us engaging with our consciousness, because our linear mind is going to say, how's that going to work? Your mind, your ego is never going to solve this. It's way bigger. But at a feeling sense, a felt sense, we can have a consciousness sense of how this is actually going to be true and it's actually going to happen. Those are my 2 cents there, Paul. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot.
I would say that it's extremely difficult even now.
Yeah.
To just get people to turn away from the shadows and face the light. Why is it so difficult? But it still is. It's still extremely difficult. And that's all it takes. It's all it takes. That's what it took for me, is turning towards the light. Honestly and sincerely embrace it and say, okay, this looking at the shadow stuff doesn't work for me anymore. What about turning towards the light? There was a book that was written, it was called The Bridge Over the River. And it was a book about a German, no, it was an Austrian soldier who was killed in the First World War. And he continued a communication with his sister for about a year. And he gives his experience in that zone between the physical life and the shadow realm, and then the spiritual realm.
Wow.
And yeah, and when you're killed as a young person, it's pretty traumatic, and so you're still kind of connected more to the physical realm, and so his experience for a while was trying to get other soldiers who had died in conflict to turn their attentions towards the light. and almost no one would listen to it, even then
They were
after
so
they died.
captivated, even in
They
the
were
astral
so
space.
captivated by what was going on, right? So, I mean, in that sense, you know, and I know this, that when it happens in the physical realm, right? You make that decision. Virtually every single person that I have ever met who's made that decision, who's done it, has a great awakening. There's some kind of vision or some experience that heralds the event. It's like coming back, and most of my people that I know who've done this is an awakening dream of some sort or an event. Once they've made it, it won't happen until you turn around and
It's a
face the
decision.
light.
It's a choice.
You have to.
It's a
You have
conviction.
you have to do it.
Yes.
But in doing so, you will have the experience. And
Yes.
so if enough people start turning towards the light, it's possible that maybe that might trigger a larger collective experience. Again, outside of time. It has to be outside of linear time in order for it to have any value.
Yes. I agree with you, Paul. I agree. And I love our conversations. And I hope everybody who's listening to us today, this is what we do. I think it's what we do very well. We go into these deep places and we share what we see, what we feel, what we're dreaming, what all of that is. And we invite people because that's how you transcend the matrix, right? We have to enter that space. So when you hang out with me and Paul, you're hanging out with us outside of time, which means we can go anywhere, and we do. And so I always appreciate that about you, Paul. And people can find you and your work and your writings and some of our videos, of course, at beyondthesoulsmeridian.org. I hope people tune in. I hope Paul and we can come back. We were here, I think this was about 2 months ago, maybe. I would like to do this regularly. 2024 is a big year, as we all know, everything that we talked about today. So to have our lenses of perception and our consciousness entering in the mass social media space, we invite people to step outside of time with us on a more regular basis this year. So thank you. Thank you, Paul, for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Marie.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we'll have more podcasts and more insights coming up for you in the coming months as more astrological events take place and as more real-time events take place. So blessings, everyone. We'll see you soon.